morning and welcome to Football League World TV. My name is Ned Holmes and this is The Debate Show. This morning I'm joined by my Football League World colleague Marcus Ali to discuss Alex Neil's situation at Stoke City and whether the Scottish coach should be under pressure already. How are you doing this morning, Marcus?
Yeah, really well, thanks, Ned. I feel like Stoke were a team that was sort of the go-tos to be tipped to win the league every season in the Championship. It doesn't happen so much anymore, but glad to be on assessing what's been a very interesting start to life at the Bet365 for Neil.
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, a surprise move for some earlier in the season. We'll get stuck into that, how things have panned out so far, that the shape of the squad and as you say, expectations at Stoke this season and moving forward. But before we do, just a reminder, please do like and share this video. Subscribe to Football League World TV on YouTube and also let us know your thoughts in the comments. Are you a Stoke fan, an EFL fan, a Sunderland fan perhaps? What have you made of Alex Neil's start to life at Bet365 Stadium, and do you think he should be under pressure already? Well, Marcus, let's remind ourselves of the sort of circumstances that saw Alex Neil appointed at Stoke. Obviously, replaced Lee Johnson as Bristol City Sunderland manager last season, and finally led them out of League One. Jumped ship though just a month into their first season back in the Championship to take charge of the Potters. What did you make of that appointment at the time, Marcus? I guess first from Stoke's perspective and then from Neil's perspective.
Well, I thought it was an excellent appointment from Stoke. Showed some ambition to go in and I would assume pay some compensation to take him away from Sunderland. A manager that has proven himself at Championship level, performed all right with Norwich City in the Premier League, considering how they've fared in the top flight since as well. So yeah, I thought it was a really exciting appointment. I think his track record suggests that it was an upgrade on Michael O'Neill. And I think in terms of Neil sort of jumping ship, as you touched on, it was a case of potentially having more resources available, potentially even a bit more control over the players that he was going to be bringing in the coming transfer window. So I do think it's quite a good fit. I think Stoke are an upwardly mobile Championship club right now, although it's not going as supporters would have hoped. And I think Alex Neil's a manager which that seems to be a sort of natural level at the moment, given what's gone in the last few years in his managerial career.
Yeah, I mean, let's take a look at his start then to life at the Bet365 Stadium. 27 games in charge so far, 9 wins, 7 draws, 8 losses, 31 Championship points earned. He arrived with them 21st in the table and has seen them move up to 18th. Obviously, it's a very congested table at the moment. So, string a couple of wins together and they'll certainly fly up towards that top half. But only 4 points from the bottom 3. So a few losses and things start to look a fair bit more concerning. I think from my perspective, Marcus, I'd suggest, it's not a terrible start, but not perhaps the one he or Stoke fans would have wanted.
Yeah, it's been consistent inconsistency, really, which is similar to what we saw at the back end of the Michael O'Neill era. Similar frustrations to what have been cropping up at Stoke in the last couple of seasons. There has been some real promise in some performances and results, but they haven't really been able to sustain those over a long run of fixtures, and that will be where some frustration comes from supporters and probably the squad itself as well. I've been encouraged by some of their away performances in particular. I think they've probably just performed a little bit better on the road than they have in front of their own fans. Read into that what you will. It'll probably be something that evened itself out in the second half of the season. But yeah, plenty of promise, but at the same time, potentially an opportunity missed in terms of how evenly matched the Championship is. And if they were able to turn a few of those draws into wins, we'd potentially be having a completely different conversation. So yeah, consistent inconsistency, a sort of continuation of what we saw under Michael O'Neill. But I think there has been enough promise shown in some performances that this is a side that Neil's going to potentially be able to improve and to produce a playoff push that the club's been lacking in the last few seasons in the future.
Yeah, I mean, looking back at Neil's management career so far, Marcus, I think he enjoyed fast starts with Hamilton, Norwich, Sunderland, and certainly to a point Preston North End. Is it a concern that having done that when he sort of took charge of other clubs, that he's not been able to have that sort of same impact at Stoke?
I like to judge these things on more of a case-by-case basis than looking at his trends in the dugout itself. I'd say Norwich and Sunderland in particular were in much better shape for Neil to come in and pull them up the table than Stoke were in terms of their squad building and where probably their natural position in the league table should have been on those instances. So it's not something that concerns me too much. I think, he's got the experience behind him to at least produce better fortunes in the second half of the season. And given the state of Stoke's squad, I think that has to pay into it. It's a group that's potentially going to take longer to assess for a new manager coming in compared to the likes of Norwich City and Sunderland, where that they're probably squads that were built in a little bit more of a productive manner with some more long-term planning involved. So I'm not too concerned that it hasn't been as fast a start as supporters would have liked. I still back Neil to turn things around and have them heading in the right direction in the longer term.
Well, from what you've said so far, Marcus, sounds like you're feeling fairly positive about the situation. It's early days, of course, but there do already seem to be a fair few sort of detractors at the Bet365 stadium. Particular criticisms that I've seen are those about style of play or lack of identity that Stoke seen in his tenure, and also about I guess some criticisms over team selections. I wanted to sort of gauge whether you felt those are warranted, or is that just a reflection of a frustrated fan base during a teething period to start a manager?
Well, I think there's lots of reasons for it, and Stokes fans have definitely seen more of their team than I have since Neil has come in. But I do still point to the makeup of the squad for the main reason why that's taken so much time. I think they're probably more suited to playing three at the back, but then they don't have much depth in wing back positions. So it's a tricky one for Neil to assess his squad, as I've touched on. But I do think in time he'll be able to sort that out. Obviously, Stoke have been a very frustrating club to follow in the last few seasons. So they were probably hoping that the Neil coming in would be the catalyst for the squad to achieve its potential, which hasn't quite come to fruition yet. So I think there's a number of reasons why Neil is sort of maybe struggling to win the fan base over, have them all on side and backing him to be the manager to take them forward. And I also think that he's a manager that probably doesn't have a distinctive style of play. When you think about an Alex Neil side, is someone that comes in, looks to assess the group at his disposal and see how he can get the best out of them in whichever way. And he is quite flexible in that regard. Now, taking that approach when you have a squad as potentially problematic as the one at Stoke potentially points towards why it's taken as long for him to really settle on the kind of combinations that he likes in the starting 11 and the approach, at least in and out of possession, that he wants to take. So, I think we need to probably wait a little bit longer before we can make complete judgments on his style of play and whether he's getting team selection right every week, because I do still believe he's in the process of completely understanding and assessing the ability of the squad at his disposal.
Sure. Let's talk about that squad at his disposal. I mean, on paper, certainly, you look at some of those players available to him and you'd suggest that, there's plenty of teams and plenty of managers in the Championship that would sort of jump at the chance to work with players like that. But as you say, it is a problematic squad. Do you put that down to the balance in that squad at the moment? Is that the issue? Is it a sort of too much cover in some areas and too little in others? What are your main issues with the squad?
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's some areas that are much better stocked than others. There's also a handful of players that were probably brought in with the ambition of firing them towards the top of the Championship. And then in the last couple of windows, you see some players that have come up with potentially the idea behind signing them being to reduce the wage bill. So it's a bit of a mishmash. It's quite bloated in areas. Neil should have the time to deal with that in his own way. There's quite a few players approaching the end of their contract, so it shouldn't be too hard to not completely tear up everything that's there, but at least put his own stamp on the squad in the coming transfer windows. As I touched on, I think 3 at the back is probably their best system due to the amount of defenders that they've got, and also crucially getting the best out of Josh Tymon, who's probably one of the more influential players since coming back to the club at the beginning of last season. However, he's had injury issues, and if you take him out of the side, it almost doesn't make sense for them to be playing a 3 at the back formation rather than a 4 due to their wing back options. So yes, it's quite difficult. The squad is probably lacking in identity, sort of looking away from the manager, which is a surprise given the amount of time that Michael O'Neill was in the dugout, but maybe suggests that he wasn't getting too much control over the players that were brought in. So yeah, I have sympathy with Neil in dealing with that kind of squad, and I think it's one that maybe in another sort of 2 transfer windows time you could look at and have a much greater idea of what he's trying to achieve at the club.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, there's criticism of Neil already and of Stoke struggles, and I guess that's to be expected of a team the size of Stoke City, a team that, as you say, almost subconsciously we assume are going to be sort of competing for those top places in the Championship year on year out. That seems to be the predictions that come in. You touched upon earlier the fact that perhaps one of the reasons he moved to Stoke might be a hope to have more control about the players that come in. This is obviously his first full transfer window in charge. We've got to take that into consideration, that this isn't his squad. It's a squad he's inherited, as you say, one that's a bit of a mishmash. But looking at that squad as a whole, do you see them as sort of underperforming, overperforming, or sort of performing at their level at the moment, or is that a bit of an unfair sort of I guess verdict to have to make just months into his tenure?
I think he's probably had enough time at the helm to start to find a judgment on that. I do think they're underperforming, definitely looking at that squad. I know there are areas of it that aren't ideal, but as you mentioned, there's plenty of individuals in that squad that clubs, even towards the top end of the division, would love to have at their disposal. So yeah, I do think they're underperforming. To have scored just 28 goals from 26 games is pretty concerning, really, when you look at the attacking talent on display. I think Liam Delap and Dwight Gale were given far too much game time across the first half of the season, probably more reflecting in the investment that it took to bring them to Stoke City rather than who would actually be more effective in the final third. So yeah, I think there's a few reasons that they are underperforming so far, and I do believe they'll be able to reach at least par by the end of the season. But right now, sitting 4 points above the relegation zone, struggling in front of goal as they have this season, there's no doubt in my mind that a club with that group of players is underperforming to be where they are in the table.
Sure. Let's look at where they are in the table then, as I touched upon before. 18th, narrowly above that relegation zone now. Phil Jagielka told Footballing World in an exclusive interview last week that there's a feeling, an optimism that Stoke can still make the playoffs. What do you make of that? I guess, what do you see their realistic target being this season? And 18th, you'd probably suggest the teams below them are all ones that we should consider for the relegation battle this season. Would you put Stoke among them as relegation candidates?
I wouldn't right now. I'm not concerned about relegation. That said, it is just 4 points above that drop zone, and their next sort of 3 or 4 fixtures are quite challenging. So it could get a bit more worrying before it gets better. But on the whole, I'm not worried about Stoke getting relegated this season. With regards to the playoffs, it's a long way off. 9 points, that's a lot to make up, especially with the number of teams that are within that 9-point gap between themselves and the top 6. I think you probably just have to aim for top half as a realistic goal and see where it takes you. If you're able to get there in fairly quick time, then maybe then they can look further up the table. Right now, I think a top half finish would be a very decent first sort of transition season into Alex Neil's methods. They could get sucked a bit closer to the relegation zone before they pull away, but I do believe that they will pull away comfortably before we reach the business end of the season.
I mean, from my perspective, Marcus, I think, we just touched upon it here, and Stoke have been, I think it's fair to say, serious since they dropped down from the Premier League. I mean, if you look at statistically, while it has been a frustrating start, you can understand the frustrations from Stoke fans, and as you say, particularly, they're the ones going to watch their team every week and not us. But a win percentage of 33.33%, narrowly lower than Mark Hughes and Michael O'Neill among recent managers, and significantly above the likes of Lambert, Gary Rowett, and Nathan Jones. We know he's someone that comes in and sort of, I guess, part of his selling point is that he likes to bring this culture change, about changing things like that. For me, it screams of the situation of a manager that needs a little bit more patience, and particularly this month, a bit more backing to shape his squad. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the January transfer window could be something that can completely change sort of the course of Stoke's season. I'm not entirely sure where they stand with regards to profit and sustainability in FFP, how much money they actually can spend in this January window. That some of their summer transfer business going after free agents would suggest that they're looking to rein it back a little bit. Whether that will limit Neil or not, I suppose the proof will be in the pudding at the end of the transfer window. Definitely a manager that's got the experience and contacts to help with that recruitment process and looking to improve the squad. But yeah, I do believe that he deserves a lot longer in the job and far more patience in looking to put them on an upward trajectory. He's had I think he might have had like the last week of the summer transfer window, so this being his first real full one to look to put his stamp on the squad, which in January probably isn't ideal. So I think probably you look to the opening few months of next season after having a full pre-season and a summer transfer window at Stoke as a point to really start to judge Neil and whether he is the right manager and has been the right replacement for Michael O'Neill.
So it sounds to me, Marcus, as if we're sort of both suggesting that it's far too early for Alex Neil to be under pressure at Stoke. My question before we wrap up would be, what needs to change, I guess. What needs to change this season to ensure he's there at sort of that he's definitely there in the summer and gets to, as you say, shape the squad. And beyond that, is it a case of if they drop down into that relegation zone, could you see a change happening?
Well, first off, he needs some wins in the short term. I think one win from 6 and just 4 points above the relegation zone, I completely understand the manager being under pressure, whether it's someone of Neil's calibre or not. That predicament in the league table will pretty much always lead to scrutiny over the person in the dugout. I think what needs to change is fans need to probably feel like they're closer to the playoffs than the relegation zone. I don't really mean league position in looking at that, but at least in points. 9 points away from the top 6 and just 4 above the relegation zone, over double the points away from the playoffs, and they are above the drop. So right now, obviously, it does feel like that's their immediate concern. So I think that's something that needs to change for Neil to regain some support from the supporter base. If they are sucked right into a relegation battle, which could potentially happen in the next few weeks because they do have some difficult fixtures on the horizon, I would like to see them stick with Neil. Even if they are battling it out right in sort of the last 10 games, I still would like to see them stick with Alex Neil. I think he shouldn't be held responsible for what's been seasons upon seasons of poor recruitment, really, since relegation for the Premier League. I don't think he should really feel the brunt of that. So, yeah, I can't see it happening, but even if they do end up in a relegation battle, I think they should stick by Alex Neil. Even if sort of worst case scenario did materialise, he won promotion from League One next season, so you would probably back him to do it again with a club like Stoke. So yeah, I definitely think he deserves a lot more patience in the dugout. I think maybe he's suffering from some of the actions of those who were at the club before him. and how they've handled things since dropping to the Championship. So, yeah, I think they can turn it around, start pushing towards a safe mid-table position, at least in the short term, and that should see Alex Neil's faith within the fan base change quite considerably.
There you have it. Stoke certainly a time more for patience than pressure when it comes to Alex Neil. Well, that's everything from myself and Marcus and us on Football League World TV today. But as always, keep your eye out for more EFL content. I'm sure that later this week and next week we'll have plenty more shows on EFL clubs and covering the transfer, the comings and goings in the transfer window as well. That leaves me to say thanks, Marcus, and thanks everyone for watching.